Well, it's 3 o'clock, so I'd like to call the Greater Dayton RTA Board of Trustees meeting to order. The first item on our agenda is the Pledge of Allegiance. Please stand. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Robert, would you take the roll call, please?
Mr. Hogan.
Here.
Ms. Hurd.
Here.
Mr. Corrado.
Here.
Mr. Depp.
Here.
Ms. Hairston.
Here.
Ms. Howell.
Present.
Ms. Jones.
Here.
Ms. Simpson.
Here.
Mr. Williams.
Here. Thank you, Robert. The minutes of the meeting of March 4th, 2014 were presented to all of the board members prior to today's meeting for their review. Unless there is any board member who requests a reading of those minutes, are there any additions or corrections that should be made to those minutes? Hearing no request for the reading of the minutes and hearing no corrections or additions, I rule the minutes stand approved as presented. We now get to a very wonderful part of our program. This is really a milestone that we have once a year, and hopefully once a year. It is a real accomplishment to reach this tremendous milestone, and that is people who can drive 1 million miles without having an accident. Let me turn it over to Mark, who will do the introductions and take us through this part of the program.
Franz, thank you so much. We love to celebrate Million Mile Club members. I just want to plant a seed, and then I'm going to get some help up here to introduce these fine folks. The average person drives, I think, about 12,000 miles a year in their personal automobile. So now start doing that math. What you think it might take to get to 1 million accident-free miles? It's a rare thing, even in our industry, and I think you'll see later in our presentation on benchmarking, we are a relatively safe system compared to our peer cities, but yet to get to that threshold of the million is just an incredible thing. So I want to introduce a couple people to come up, and I'll join them, and we will introduce to you this year's entries into our Million Mile Club. First, Jim Napier is going to come up. He's our Director of Safety and Security Solutions, and Brandon Polachicchio is going to come up on behalf of the Operations Department. Allison is unable to be here today, unexpectedly, but she's unable to be here. And then I'll join them, and then Jim's going to introduce and talk a little more about the Million Miles.
Thanks, Mark. Just to echo what you've already heard, this is a very special day, and it's very special for the people involved here. Back in 2010, we started the Million Mile Club. We really wanted to stretch and challenge our people to be as safe as possible. And then with that is recognition. To date, we've got over 20 members in the Million Mile Club, and that's just unbelievable for a system our size and the 8 million miles of revenue service we provide annually. So with that said, let's go ahead and get started. I'm really excited for these people. Again, congratulations. Personal and professional milestones, something that you can be proud of for the rest of your life. So let's get started. Our first recipient today is Michael Banta.
Did you want to say a couple words, Mike?
Congratulations.
I just thank you for this recognition, and it's just every day keep practicing, and I would have to compliment the Smith system. I do use that every day, and it does make a difference. Thank you.
Smith system is a program we put in place here a few years back. I'm actually a graduate of the Smith system, the class of 1976. And I've always been a believer in the system. It's a truly defensive driving system, and some people call it space cushion driving. We've implemented it in a couple of cities I've worked in, and always seen good results. But it's great to hear our Million Mile Club folks talk about it. I know to this day, if I'm in my personal car or in a bus, it's in my head. And in fact, I have my refresher. Jim made me go through a refresher course if I wanted to be considered a CDL driver here at the RTA. And it's really fabulous, but that's the kind of feedback we like to hear. We know people are getting something from that.
Absolutely. Thanks again, Mike, for coming today. And I was a street supervisor when Michael actually started here, so keep up the good work. Our next recipient today is Gary L. Haught.
Thanks again for this award. I really appreciate it. I'd like to mention our union president, Glenn Sawyer, is here. He's always pressing safety as the drivers at the union meetings, and the Smith system also, Glenn. So we have a little applaud for Glenn Sawyers for all the hard work he does. He works about an 80-hour week, and a lot of people don't know that. And I know Mark's a hard worker also, and we appreciate the fine management here at RTA and the Smith system. That's really added to safety and well-being for everyone. And I really enjoyed working here at RTA. I've worked over 20 years now, and I really appreciate the time, and the management did such a wonderful job. And I'd like to say how well the ambassadors do, and all the fine management. And if I knew I was going to talk, I would have brought my notes. Thank you.
Would you guess for us how many of your miles are trolley miles?
Probably 500. Probably half of them. It's
Probably more than half of them. As Gary's going back, I want to say something about Gary. Anybody remember Valentine's Day? Valentine's evening, we had a mess on our hands. We were supposed to get a dusting of snow, and it turned into 5 or 6 inches of snow. And those are nightmarish kinds of situations for organizations like ours. And they kind of test us as an organization then. I happened to be down on the platform. I don't know what, Gary might remember what time it was. It was 6 or 7 o'clock that night. And Gary was coming in on a trolley, and he was headed to the garage. And I didn't have to go to Gary. Gary got off his bus, came to me and said, "What can I do to help? Can I run another route for you?" You know, and that's the kind of attitude you love to see in a person. But that's Gary, and he did that. And I said, "Well, if you can get yourself wrapped around this thing once more and run a number 8 for me," he probably stayed out for many hours that night, and you know, we appreciate that. Good stuff.
Thank you.
Oh, we forgot the picture.
Thanks. And a side note for Gary, he also served on our operations safety team and was previously an instructor. So real proud of your accomplishment today, Gary. Our last recipient, we actually had to dig into the archives. She has since retired from RTA, and we're very proud that she came back today to receive her award, and that's Donna Michelle Woodward.
But she retired young, age 39, right?
Absolutely.
It's nice to be back. I said when I took off my uniform, I was never going to put it back on, and I didn't, and I haven't, but I loved working for RTA. It was a wonderful thing, and not only a million miles did I drive, I know I had 1 million people. I know I did. I entertained a lot, but I did. And I want to say the Smith system is the best. I still do it, but family doesn't like it when I sit way back behind a car and they say, why don't you move closer? I don't want to, because I know how safe it is, and I believe in safe. I really do. So I hope you continue with the program. I hope everyone who is driving like what you're doing. If you don't like it, I'm sorry, you're here. You got to stay.
And just another aside note for Donna Michelle. She's quite the karaoke queen. Whenever we had our talent contest at RTA, she typically won hands down.
Did she sing?
She did. She's quite the singer, I'm telling you.
She is.
And besides that, I've always viewed her as more than a bus operator here at RTA. She's always been a cornerstone of encouragement for both operators and managers, and I can't say enough about her as a person. So thanks for coming back today.
Thank you, Jim.
Congratulations, Michael, Gary, and Donna. On behalf of the board, I extend my congratulations to you and our sincere thanks for how well you have represented the RTA. Jim said you could be proud of what you've accomplished. I assure you the board and management are proud also of what you have accomplished. So thank you very much. May you be blessed with many, many years of good health and happiness. Thank you so much again.
What do you think, another million?
We now move on to, I believe, a very interesting part of our presentation, and we have some special guests here from the UK. Let me turn the program again over to Mark, who will introduce this and proceed with the presentation.
Great, thank you, Franz. We're going to have a presentation today about one of my favorite things. It's the American Bus Benchmarking Group. And I always like especially for the benefit of the newer board members, we have been blessed with a really strong board and a board that's been open to new and different ideas, different approaches. From the very first year I was here, Mary Stanforth and I, came to the board and said, we want to walk away from our insurance company, the Ohio Transit Risk Pool, and try something different. We think it might save us some money, and we've saved well in excess of $1 million in the years since we terminated that relationship. Audio ads was another one. I know there was a lot of concern when we were going out to bid on advertising on buses. Sabrina said, can we add one more paragraph to this RFP? And I said, well, what's it about? She said, well, what if somebody has a new and different idea? Should we try it? I said, put it in there. Let's see what happens. And lo and behold, this young couple who lived in Chicago and rode the trains and buses in graduate school had this great idea that if you could, GPS trigger stop announcements on buses, you could probably sell advertising that way. So they started this little business called Commuter Advertising right here in Dayton, Ohio. They relocated here, and before you know it, they had contracts in 13 other cities, and they were handed a small fortune in venture capital to grow the business. They have a call center still here. Actually, it's right down the street here in one of the buildings downtown. And it's another great success. We took a little risk with them, but there's been some reward from it. So this one wasn't so risky, I didn't think, anyway. But I've been a benchmarker probably since I was a brunette. I overuse that phrase a lot. But I've always been kind of a data freak. I've always wanted to know, the reality of, are we good, are we bad? I don't adjust my budgets. Franz and I agree on that. I want to know what happened, even if it was bad, so we can learn from that and do better. So benchmarking was a natural for me. So a number of years ago, APTA has a mid-sized transit operations committee, and when it was still an informal group, Mark Ash, the guy that used to run the system in Rochester, New York, approached me, and he said that he had heard I liked to benchmark. And I said, I love it, but a lot of people in our industry are afraid of it. There's a lot of fear out there about sharing your data about your transit system with the public because, oh my God, they might see where we're not so great. But Mark, on the other hand, was sold on the idea that we needed to do it. So was I. So we basically started talking it up, and before it was over, I don't recall the initial list. We had 8 or 10, I think, cities. Originally, we have 17 now, and I don't want to steal their whole presentation, But each year, the folks from Imperial College London who developed the model for this come to the States and they visit a couple of the cities. We're lucky this year to be one of the cities they're visiting, and we fought to arrange it so they could be here for a board meeting, get to meet you, get you to hear a little bit more about the background on what the benchmarking group is, what it's intended to be, and ask the questions you might have directly of them. So we're fortunate to have with us today these fine young gentlemen in the back row, and that's Mark Trumpet and Alexander Barron. They are the guys. I may be the data freak, but they're the data miners, I would say. They're the ones that get this information together. And what we'd like to do is have them make a presentation, and then I'm going to follow with just a few slides on why we think it's important to benchmark as RTA, and then open it up to questions for the board. So, gentlemen. We have a handheld mic. You can use that one if you want.
Yeah, this is okay. If you can hear me all right? Well, thank you very much. It's a real honor for us to be here and have the chance to tell you a little bit about who we are and what we're doing and how RTA is involved. So I just want to start by telling you how we view benchmarking, because there's a lot of definitions that are used and maybe some confusion in the world about it. This is the definition that we follow, and it's really about doing something over a long period of time. It's not a one-time study or a report from a consultant that says, you know, you're high here and low there. It's really about comparing and understanding performance and how performance changes over time. And to get that right, we have to look at it for many years. We have to develop the group together so that we're measuring the same things and we're understanding, you know, what happened in Cleveland last year that led to an increase in this, or what happened in California last year that led to a decrease. And we have to do that not only about on-time performance, although obviously that's one thing we look at. We have to do it about a diversity of the transit business. And certainly it's no surprise to anyone here that the transit business is very diverse, that we have to think about finance and subsidy and fares and safety and maintenance and all of those things to really understand how an organization is performing. And lastly, the most important thing really is that this process is about improving. It's not about pointing fingers or assigning blame to different departments. It's about what can we learn by comparing performance, what can we learn from the other agencies to improve in each city. So we try to do that by understanding what are the strengths and weaknesses in each place, what are the characteristics that enable or push back against improvements, what might be most likely achievable, so what are realistic targets, for example. And we try to do that by saying, how have people implemented good ideas in other places? What has or hasn't worked in other cities? Because even though each transit organization is a bit of a silo in its own city, the challenges are clearly shared. Certainly the people in Florida don't have your problem of dealing with snow and ice, but they do have buses with people and air conditioning in the summer and so on. Just briefly who we are, we're from a research center called the Railway and Transport Strategy Center at Imperial College in London. And I've included a ranking here on the right just because most people haven't heard of Imperial College. Now, you've probably heard of Oxford and Cambridge, and we're basically the one after that. So the third best in the UK, if you will. And we're often called the MIT of Europe because we're a technical university with engineering and biomedical science and so forth. Our own little center with about 20 people now is focused on public transit benchmarking, public transit operations, and also we do a lot of work with economics of public transit and fare policy and things like that. We've been doing this benchmarking between transit agencies around the world for 20 years now. It started in 1994 when 5 of the biggest subway systems in the world, including New York, London, Paris, and Hong Kong, got together and said, we need to start talking. We're dealing with the same issues in different parts of the world, and actually some of that interplay between the old world and the new and the East and the West was really critical in improving things in all of those cities. So that started in '94. It's called COMET now, the Community of Metros, and it blossomed into a second metro group in the late '90s. And in 2004, we started doing bus benchmarking with some of those same cities. that had a hunger, like Mark does, for benchmarking. So that was the start of the International Bus Benchmarking Group in 2004, and today that includes London, Paris, Seattle, Montreal, New York, and several other members. After that, we actually branched into suburban rail or commuter rail services with a group called Iceberg, and that also led to the founding, ultimately, of this group, ABBG, in 2011. And I mention that sort of history because the principles and the model of doing the benchmarking have been sort of developed and honed over that period, using the same sort of core values, and those are listed at the bottom here. Because the groups are really about working together, sharing information, and often, we learn more from what went wrong somewhere than what went right. So it has to be a sharing of the good and bad. And that's one reason why it's considered confidential, so that we can be sure that open and honest information exchange is happening between all the members, without being concerned of how precisely everything that's said might look in the press or so forth. The other principles that are important really are that the groups are relatively small. So Mark said there's 17 members today. If we get much larger, we'll actually have to subdivide into 2 groups because it's important to have a group that's small enough to talk, to have a meeting that isn't using microphones even, if we can help it, and have people talk across the table about their experiences. And because it's small and it's developed by the members themselves, the group is quite independent. So we're not part of APTA, not part of FTA. It's an independent effort led by you, by the transit agencies, with our help as sort of facilitators and managers to pursue the agenda of learning about performance across the group. We've included a slide here from the transit agency in Montreal because I think they put it better than we could in terms of what are the benefits. And just to summarize, they're probably one of the better agencies in the world of using the benchmarking. And they use it for things like setting priorities, figuring out how best to use their limited resources, learning where they're strong and where they're not, and actually figuring out, okay, we know what our problem is, what do we do to get better? And they do that by looking around the world to say, what are they doing elsewhere? How are they approaching this problem? And maybe we can steal that idea and implement it ourselves. And one thing that's done for them and can do for all of the members really is gaining credibility, whether it's with stakeholders like yourselves, whether it's with the government or the FTA, to say, we're understanding what our strengths and weaknesses are, we've figured out what we need to do, now we need your support, whether it's for funding or decision making. So I'll just explain briefly who is in the group and a little bit about the characteristics. We have 17 members, as Mark mentioned. You can see they're spread out around the country, pretty good geographic diversity, including sort of the older northeastern cities on the right, that Dayton is just kind of peeking into there, but also members in the West Coast, and in a surprising range of environments, of suburban and urban, BRT systems even, longer distance buses, city center circulators, quite a range. I'm going to show you a couple of graphs, and we use these 2-letter codes to represent them. So you'll see Dayton shown as DY in the pages that follow. Just quickly, something about the size of the members. This is just the average annual boardings, or the annual ridership. And you can see it ranges from about 4 million over on the right in Des Moines and San Joaquin in California, all the way up to Cleveland with nearly 40 million. But we can normalize for that. We can compare big and small statistically without a problem. What we have to be careful of are the characteristics. So we've looked to make sure that the members have similar service and operating characteristics, meaning routes that operate 7 days a week, all day in both directions, maybe a 30-minute headway as sort of a baseline, as opposed to, say, smaller systems that don't do those things. And more than the raw size, that's important to make sure we are comparable. The same goes for the fleet size. So this shows the number of buses in each city in the group. And again, we can adjust for the size and scale, and we even look at things like not just the number of buses, but how big are they, how many seats do they have, how many standees might they plan to carry on those buses in peak times, and even things like the weight of the buses is an important factor that we consider. Now, RTA is actually the only member in the group that has all standard-sized buses. Some of the members have articulated buses, some have mini vehicles that they use for flexible routes or deviated fixed routes. And you're also the only member with trolley buses. But we've got a good diversity. We've got 2 members with CNG, so the interesting comparison to see the pros and cons of that, and a growing amount of hybrid buses everywhere, including here in Dayton. In Eugene, actually, they're up to pushing 50% of their fleet with hybrids. So we can adjust for size and scale, but we have to understand the characteristics. So this is kind of an interesting graph, I think. It's showing you for each hour of the day, across the bottom, what proportion of the buses in the fleet, in the active fleet, are in service. And you can see there's quite a range. So everybody has a rise in the morning, and something happens in the middle of the day, and another peak in the afternoon. But some of those are very flat, as you see at the top, up here, which basically means the bus goes out in the morning, and it's out all day long, and comes back in the evening. Whereas others have very strong peaks. So in cases where there's a lot of school-related service or where there's a strong commuter peak to the city center, the downtown, in the morning, we get more of this kind of pattern. So RTA here is just about in the middle of the group. But we can see, for example, we know you have a long span in your evening service, and you can see you have more of your vehicles out toward the end of the day than many of the others. So we can understand those characteristics and how it affects performance and KPIs. I wanted to mention also that we're doing some work in paratransit, and I think this is really exciting because there hasn't been much in the way of benchmarking of paratransit before that we know of. So across the members of the group, we're starting to develop KPIs for paratransit. And this is just to illustrate the differences and the complexity maybe of benchmarking paratransit. So within this group alone, there's almost an even split between members where all of the service is provided in-house, like here in Dayton. All of the service is contracted out, as is the case, for example, in Austin, Texas, or Eugene, Oregon. And then some members actually have a split, maybe 40-60 or 50-50, where they do some operations themselves, but they also contract some of it out. In terms of paratransit, just to give you a sense of the scale, this is looking at the average annual paratransit ridership for each member. And you can see lots happening. In some places, like in Cleveland, a very significant increase every year, even bigger in 2012, of increasing paratransit ridership. And here in Dayton, a bit of a decrease. As I understand, you've been working with paratransit customers to be able to use fixed route service where possible. So what do we do to achieve this benchmarking in the group? Well, we have a series of 5 elements that we do every year as part of the annual cycle. And the baseline is really the key performance indicator system. So we have that both for fixed route service and for paratransit. And we collect the data and analyze the data. There's a report, there's a database, there's a customized graphing tool in Excel, which allows each member to make any graph they'd like and compare things on the fly. But we also collect and understand some of that context information about the profile of each member. And I'll tell you more in a moment about the customer satisfaction survey that goes along with that. We also do small studies of comparing maybe 10 to 20 questions, and I'll show you an example of that. We have a website, which I'll demonstrate, and then we also have one meeting a year where the managers come together to share the results, discuss them, and share their experiences. And lastly, our favorite part is coming to see you to help share some of the results and understand the data. In terms of the key performance indicators, this is the list of KPIs that we use. And I won't mention all of them, but just to say that we do try to look in each area. This was based on the Harvard Business School balanced scorecard model. And it's really designed to say that if you're going to be a good transit agency, if you're going to be a good company of any sort, you can't only be good in one area. You have to be good at everything. You have to be safe. You have to be cost efficient and cost effective. You have to be, have efficient labor and workforce. So we try to look at all of those areas. This is just one example of a KPI, and I know Mark is going to show a couple others. The data is anonymized, so you don't know who the other agencies are specifically, and that's part of the protocol of the group to ensure that the information is accurate. But what you're seeing here, for example, is total cost per mile. So how much does it cost for each mile of service compared to the group average, which is 1. So here we can look at, first of all, where is Dayton? Well, just below the average, so that's better than average. What's happening over time? In the case of Dayton, pretty steady, which would imply good cost management. You can see some members are reducing costs, like here. Others are experiencing significant cost increases over time, and we can try to understand those. And ultimately, we use this kind of information to start drilling down to say, what is happening that's causing these changes, and what are some, like this member perhaps, doing to improve? I mentioned the customer satisfaction survey. This was done last year for the first time, and you guys advertised it on your website here to attract people to participate, which I think was very successful. This has been done in the international group now for several years, and really the purpose is to try and find a way to compare customer satisfaction between cities. And we know certainly that people in Florida, for example, at least in the winter, are probably a little happier than you might be here. So we try to adjust for that and compare how well are you satisfying your customers relative to their expectations. So we're able to compare things like you see down here regarding customer satisfaction. I mentioned small studies, just 2 examples that we've done recently. One about marketing, communications, and social media for the agencies to understand how they're using those tools in their respective cities. And also one about administration cost reporting that we're using to try and better understand how do we capture admin cost and how does it compare between the members. I mentioned the website. There's a secure website that the group uses, and probably one of the most valuable tools is a secure forum for discussion. So this is a screenshot of that. These are the questions that RTA has posted on the forum over the last couple of years, and I think, for me at least, it's great to see some information that's been gathered through the group that's been put into practice here, like the introduction of the day pass or the introduction of service to the airport. But it's a very useful tool to get quickly, maybe within a week or 2, sort of 5 or 6 maybe answers from agencies elsewhere to say, what is your policy about bikes? Or, what are the hours you serve your airport, and so forth. And with that, I'll stop talking and turn it over to Mark, but just to say thank you for this opportunity, and after we're finished, I would certainly welcome any questions or comments.
Oh, it doesn't have a label. Well, again, Franz asked that I give some thoughts about, why from an internal perspective we do this. I'm using the same presentation. We've been asked to make another presentation at an APTA meeting this year, so I just want to steal some of the slides. You all know about Dayton, Ohio, don't you? I think you do. And we always tell people a little bit about us, what we do, our trolley buses. Oh, there's a Beaver Creek picture. So a lot of people ask me when we start talking about benchmarking, why would we want to do this? Well, for us, it seemed like a kind of a natural outgrowth of the whole core values process and the whole idea starting back with a board retreat in February 2006. That's when I think, for me, it started to say, we want to take this organization to a place where it is the best it can be. Hopefully, it's best in class. So to do that, we want to do a lot of things, and it's all about a variety of core values, but benchmarking is part of that. Now, benchmarking isn't new to Dayton, Ohio. I put this up here intentionally. I don't know, there's many people here that remember this. Before I arrived here back in 2005, the board hired an outside firm and brought in some consultants. And one of the things that was done in that report was a peer analysis. And I was the project manager for that. That's when I first came to Dayton in 2005 and kind of fell in love with Dayton. And I can tell you, it was worse than pulling teeth trying to get the data from these cities, because the board at the time here wanted some specific cities, and I almost had to do public records requests in Ohio to get data. It was kind of silly, I thought. So if you went back to that report that we did back in 2005, you would see a lot of benchmarking in it. a slightly different peer group, but definitely the whole report was really based on that. So what are the benefits of benchmarking? Well, I think it's as simple as Alex put it. I mean, you know, every organization is really good at some things and maybe not as good at others. My goal is that we identify all of those. So we make sure that if we've got a program that works well, we should support it. We should make sure it has what it needs to get done. We did some recent changing of the data, so I'm looking for my date. There's my date, and there it is. We're on the left on this one. So here's obviously an example of where we're a little better than our peers. So that's a wonderful thing. So I always pick two that are good to show them. Just kidding. When we get this data, I always remember the first time we got it. The first data set was, I swear, was this thick if you printed it. So there was a lot there. But I want to show you this for a reason. So obviously this is something that works well in Dayton. This is another one of our favorites, and this goes back to, if you go back to my first few years here, we had a significant financial problem. We really had to work hard to get our numbers down on administrative costs. And the goal of the board and our senior management team was, before we took a bus off the street, we would make sure we downsized as much as we could from an overhead perspective, and we did that. And those are the results you see, that compared to our peer cities, we have a very low administrative cost per mile. So here's one not so good. And I always throw one in that's not so good. Now, this is one that always brings up a lot of argument when you talk to people in the industry about miles between road calls, but we know that. A big contributor here is our trolley fleet that's aging. It's more than aging, it's aged, and it breaks down frequently and causes us some problems. But it's an example of an area where maybe we're not so good. So we want to know that. Why? So we can find a way to make that better. So what are the benefits? You know, our industry is a pretty small industry. We all basically have very similar fleets. Sometimes propulsion's different. You know, we have, they mentioned we have an all CNG fleet in Fort Worth and some other things like that. But there are a lot of similarities. The very first joint meeting that Frank and I went to was in Rochester the first year. And the very first evening, at basically a welcoming reception, I got to talking to the Rochester maintenance guy about buses, and he said, well, you have Gillig buses, right? And the next morning, he drugged me away from the tour and took me over and got me under some buses and said, you need to make sure your maintenance people know about this. So it's that whole idea of information sharing. The bulletin board, Alex talked about that. We've posted 11 things, and I'm always, Frank's really the guy that monitors that for us. He makes sure that we respond. When somebody asks if we can, we want to respond, because we know when we post a question, the day pass, I think, was a great example. We immediately got a lot of information back about the pricing and how the things work in the different cities. So it's a great, great thing. And then best practices. And I'll give you two examples of that, one internal, one external. We are studying what they're doing in San Joaquin, California with their paratransit, because they have done wonders in terms of lowering their cost and increasing their productivity and providing a lot more rides than they did in the past. And it's a very different approach. It's what I would call a hybrid of a point deviation type system on their paratransit. So that's something we've been studying. Well, interestingly, last year at an APTA meeting, Donna DiMartino is the CEO in San Joaquin. She said to me one day, she said, you know, I've been looking at the benchmarking data, and you guys are really good at safety. She says, what would it take for you to loan your safety guy to me for a few days? And I said, you just pay his expenses. That's all you got to do. So not that long ago, just a few months ago, Jim made a trip out to San Joaquin, and as I understand it, he got free pizza while he was there. But Jim was helping them go through the issues they're having, because they're not doing so well on the safety side. And that's the whole idea. We now have this bigger group of friends, these 17 cities, you know, that all want to get together and share information, obviously to make things better. So what does it do? It provides us an excellent working tool. That looks familiar to you because that's your board statistics that you get every month. We take a select number of the data graphs that are really, that come out of the benchmarking business, and we hybrid them into your board packet, because I want it just to be a way we do business here internally and locally, which is good. It supports our ability to set targets for achievement and work our way towards them. And then we know the truth. We know what the real truth is on a situation, when, as opposed to we're just guessing what we're good and bad at. And staff engagement probably my favorite, because when we've got the first data set, we set aside the better part of a day in my office, and we started projecting on the wall, I want to say 85 different charts. And we had all the senior staff in there, and there was everything from joy to pain to, wait a minute, that can't be right. I know we're better than that. And then Frank and I would say, well, that was the data you gave us, so let's dig in, and we did. And what I loved about it was just watching everyone in that room focused on that wall. Suddenly, they were probably much more engaged than maybe they were, because typically what you're doing in this business is you're working really hard to get buses out the door today. And sometimes you need to step back and look at this other data, because it tells you an awful lot. So for me, that's probably been one of the greatest things. So the truth shall set you free. I'm going to reuse this one. I used it in Seattle a few years ago. There is no perfect transit system in the United States. There are some of my colleagues, I think, in their heads, they think they are. But we know for a fact they're not. We all do some things well, and there are other things that we don't do as well that we should work to improve. So I think step one of this process is admit our imperfection, and I'm here to do that today. You know, the bottom line to me is no two communities are alike. I always ask people to focus on the peer averages, because there's always a desire to focus at, wow, who's that dude at the top of the chart, and why are they there? Well, they may have a BRT system, you know, like Cleveland does, and suddenly they're carrying millions more people than they were a few years ago, because they run buses every 5 minutes and articulated in a corridor, and it works really well. So I think that's really critical that people understand it. So my goal is to focus on the peer averages, and where we're below them, we want to move towards them. And a few years ago in Seattle, when we were asked to do the first presentation of this for an APTA annual meeting, I loved it because the fellow from Montreal was there. And before the session, and it was a standing room only session. There were like 200 people in this session because they wanted to see what we were doing. So I asked the guy from Montreal, I said, how long have you been doing this and all that? And they've been doing it 8 or 10 years. I said, so, you know, in my head, I believe that over time we will see the averages rise. And he said, you're absolutely right. Everybody's performance improves that's a part of the group. So if you go back to where I was in 2005 and everybody was afraid to share their data because what the public might think, I think Alex's slide said it really well. My answer to the public is we want to benchmark because we want to know where we're not so good and what we need to do to improve that. We're going to work to improve the things we're not really good at. Hopefully we're going to continue to maintain the things that we are really good at and be proactive, not reactive. I think that's the difference between a manager and a leader. Leaders look for that information. They want to know what the truth is, and they want to move towards a place to fix it. And that can be different in every community. The first transit system I managed, we washed buses by hand. And I asked, my God, it's 1985. Why are we washing buses by hand? And the answer was they wanted to employ people. It was a very small community. And I said, well, how about if we employ people learning to turn a wrench in the shop, and we let an automated system wash the buses? Would you be okay with that? And they were okay with that, and that was the fix. But, you know, every community is different, but the bottom line is what we want to do is see all ships rise with the tide, and that's why we love the benchmark. So it gives us information. It's not always pleasant, but it's really what we need to see. And that's one of my favorite pictures of Right Style Plaza. So it finds its way into every presentation. So with that, what I'd like to do is throw it back to the board. We've got Alex and Mark here to answer the tough questions, and I'll back them up.
Thank you very much, Mark. And Alex, on behalf of you and your colleague, I thank you for being here today and sharing your thoughts and observations with us. And I think that's maybe a perfect segue into my question. You opened your presentation by saying you get to learn the strengths and weaknesses of an organization. And clearly you dig down into the data to determine what can be gleaned from that data and pass your comments on to them. Please share with us your 1 or 2 major observations of the RTA, and what recommendations would you give us of where we should put our emphasis or focus to increase the quality of what we do?
Thank you. That's quite a good question and an important one. I think certainly we're seeing one of the key success stories of the recent years is such an improvement in safety, going from, you know, if you will, following Mark's group average story, going from above the group average to well below and continuously improving. And there's no further proof of that for me than what we heard at the start of this meeting of the Million Mile Club. In terms of a couple other observations. I think in terms of finance, we see an interesting story of a very cost-effective operation, especially relative to peers such as Cleveland or Rochester, places that are similar sort of northeastern older city. So a cost-effective operation that has lost riders because of the nature of the city and the economy. So it seems to me like you're putting a lot of good transit service out there, and because of changes in the city, perhaps the riders are not as many as they used to be. So attracting people to that and showing people the good service you have is an important thing from a cost-effectiveness point of view in the future.
Thank you. Any other questions from the board members? Allow me to add one more then, too. One of the difficulties that I've always experienced in industry, how are we sure we're comparing apples with apples? Because what goes into the data has many variables and many issues. Are you confident that of all the people in this benchmarking group submitted data so they truly allow us to compare apples with apples?
We are, sorry, I normally have a loud voice, but that's a very good question, and that's why we call this a continuous process. So we don't believe you can do benchmarking in a one-year event. It takes, in our opinion, at least 2, probably 3 years of continuous iterations of data collection, understanding the data, feedback, learning about systems, to actually be able to say, well, we're now managing the data on the same basis, and where we're not, we know why and we know where. So we can make conclusions saying, oh, hang on, that data includes some other stuff that others don't, but we know that it's approximately 10%. So it's about understanding the data, and it takes 2 to 3 years before you're there. We're getting there on the fixed route system. That's why we've now issued a software tool for all the members that they can produce their own charts to work with. But we believe we're at least 1 year off a system where we say managers can use that information comparatively on the paratransit side. So we have some warnings there still.
I would add to that we spent the better part of the first year arguing about definitions. And that's the peer members themselves. And an old friend of mine, Dave Lee, who manages Connecticut Transit, which is Hartford, Stamford, and New Haven, all 3 systems. Dave and I we're the old school benchmarkers, and we were always arguing with people about, you've got to agree on the definitions. Well, then once you do, then you've got to be honest. And I remember the first meeting in Rochester, we sat in the room, and these guys started throwing charts up one at a time. Well, every once in a while you'd see a chart where somebody's data was way off. And so you knew there was a problem with that data. And I think on the fixed route side, I think we're really at the point where we've gotten through that. Can we ever know it's 100% perfect? No, but that's why, again, I always go back to those averages, because there'll always be those little differences, but I think for the most part, we've gotten to the point where we honestly agree on the definitions, and I think everybody's on board with making sure we're as close as we can, to being perfect.
Okay. Just to follow up on that same question, though, are there any indicators that you recommended that should be adopted for benchmarking that this group has not selected?
Actually, no, I don't think so. We started with the data set that we use in the international group, and then based on feedback of all the managers involved, we made changes to that. So we adapted it to the US system and the needs of the environment here. So I think we've got a good balanced KPI set there.
Okay.
There were definitely some high-end, some of the big international systems that I think they get really focused on things like capacity, which is much more of an issue for them because they get excess capacity. So there were things like that they focus a lot on that we decided wasn't as important.
Mm-hmm. Alex?
You might, just out of interest, you might be interested to know that there are a couple of things that we're working on with the members that are sort of in a development phase, and one of those is understanding what service is lost. So trips that are missed or mileage that's curtailed because a bus has turned short of the end of the route. That's something that there's not a lot of data on. I think you guys are one of the few that do have the data. But that's something that the group said we don't know this now, but we agree it's important, and we're going to work to get the data better. And with that, there's also the customer area that we're working to develop. And one of the reasons we did the customer satisfaction is because it's hard to really measure the customer experience or the customer service of transit agencies with sort of these kinds of numbers. So that's something that I think all the groups around the world are trying to find better ways of capturing, and it's becoming increasingly important for transit providers everywhere.
Thank you.
I just want to compliment Mark and the staff, and also you folks from the Imperial College. Benchmarking has become really, really important, and it seems like in the last 10 years, more people have been willing to gather as a group and share information. I know we did that in our construction business, where we met with 7 companies over a period of 3 years, went to their offices. We're doing that here in the county with MCO Futures. United Way has done it, and I think for a public agency to be doing that, there's nothing but good to come out of it, and especially since you're all meeting in the, in the framework of the same size and types of operations. So I think this is great, and you'll only make what we're doing better.
I would like to add to Vince's comment. I've only been on the board a little over 4 years, and it's always been under Mark's leadership as our CEO. At least I, in those 4 years, have never felt that information was withheld from us or that a defensive posture was taken when recommendations were made or criticisms were voiced. It really was open, not only to the public, but truly to the board, and we're very, very fortunate. One hears about horror stories that take place at certain organizations, but that has not been my experience in the last 4 years, and I'm sure the other board members feel the same way. Yeah. Are there any other questions you'd like to address? Well, hearing none, we certainly want to thank you again for what you're doing, and we're looking forward to using benchmarking at each one of our committee meetings as we go forward.
Absolutely. We're going to keep them in town another day so we can get more sales tax out of it.
That's good. Thank you so much. Moving on in our agenda, now we get to the committee reports, and we're going to start with the Planning Committee, and that's Janet Jones.
Thank you. The Finance, Personnel, and Planning Committees met on March 18th, and we have one action item to bring forth to you. Action item number 2, 2014 RTA Community Grant Program Awards. Mr. Eckler provided a summary of suggested community grant awards for 2014. Since 1996, the RTA has provided 80% federal transit enhancement funding support to jurisdictions interested in improving various bus stops and pedestrian access in their respective communities. Jurisdictions provide the 20% match and also assume all maintenance and operational expenses. Ultimately, this program has no impact on the RTA budget. This year, the Community Grant Evaluation Committee recommended approval of 5 community grant projects in the cities of Centerville, Dayton, and Kettering. Details of these recommended projects are included in your board packet for your review. The Finance, Personnel, and Planning Committees discussed this item at the March 18th meeting, and it was recommended that the Board of Trustees approve the recommended 2014 community grants in the amount of $157,577, and I so move.
I'll second.
It's been moved and properly second. Are there any questions or comments? Hearing none, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, like sign. Any abstentions? Motion passes.
Franz, I'd just like to make mention of the Valley Street project there. You might recognize the name Deborah Feldman. This is a partnership with the City of Dayton and Children's Hospital to make some seriously maybe long overdue improvements at the bus stops there. And Deb called me personally about the project, and I made it clear that it had already actually passed through the committee at that point in time, and we were really pleased to see the hospital taking a leadership role and helping us there. And I would want to make the comment, because this is one of my favorite programs that has no attachment to me. This predates my time in Dayton. But when we award these projects through the Community Grants Program, One of the things that the home municipality agrees to is not only the local cash match, so we don't have to reduce our reserve, but also the ongoing maintenance of the asset. And that actually does impact our operating budget to the extent that those are assets that would exist that we would maintain through one of our contracted firms. So it's a great idea. I've never seen it anywhere but here in Dayton, Ohio, and it's a wonderful thing. It's a great partnership for the communities, and I think that like the one at Children's Hospital, they're going to make it a very unique setting there because of, the issues they deal with, and we're really excited about that. But I just wanted you to know that, and know that, as usual, our good friend Deborah Feldman is still wanting to be a partner with RTA.
Thank you, Mark, and I assure all of here present today that the board takes very careful review of every one of these items. Over the years, there have been many that have not been approved by the board and have never, therefore, come before this committee. So all of these have been deemed to be worthwhile and important to our community, and I commend the committee who did the review and brought it to the attention of the full board. Thank you, Mark. Okay.
I have a couple more
Yes.
items. Okay. Mr. Eckler also provided an update regarding the Beaver Creek Bus Stop Design Standards, which went through a second reading at the March 24th Beaver Creek Council meeting. Ms. Pritchard in the Marketing Department also provided an update on RTA's sponsorship of the upcoming Levin Foundation Celebrating Life and Health Fair, and RTA's participation in the PACE Community Expo held at Sinclair Community College on March 8th. And this concludes my report, and we're available if there are any questions.
Are there any questions of Janet? Sir. Hearing none, we'll then move on to the Finance and Planning Committees. Sharon Hairston.
As mentioned by Ms. Jones, our joint committees met on March 18th with the Finance Personnel Committee recommending one action item for approval by the Board of Trustees at today's meeting. Action item number 3, advisory services. At our meeting, Mr. Donahue explained that on the morning of February 24th, 2014, an incident occurred at Lakeview and McLean Streets involving RTA operator Rick Wagner and RTA trolley bus number 9819. An assault with a gun and knife by 3 individuals was reported by the operator, who suffered a gunshot wound to the leg, a laceration to his left arm, and other injuries. It was determined that same morning that an event of this magnitude posed a serious potential effect on safety, welfare, and RTA's ability to deliver transportation services. The potential impacts to the organization resulting from the incident required staff to seek professional guidance in developing RTA's messaging and response to media inquiries. Given staff's knowledge of the firm's capabilities based upon prior and current relationships with the Burgess and Burgess team and their unique ability to assist staff, as well as the lack of time given the nature of the events being dealt with, the executive director determined that an emergency procurement of services for counsel, message development, and communications strategy was in order. Given that there is an existing contract for services with Burgess and Burgess, and additional services would exceed the $25,000 authorization limit, and therefore the executive director seeks board approval for additional spending authority not to exceed $25,000. The grand total of the combined agreements will not exceed $50,000. Mr. Donahue is available today to answer any questions the board may have. Based upon the recommendation made at the committee meeting, I move that the Board of Trustees approve an additional contract award to Burgess and Burgess in the amount of $25,000 to provide for advisory services. The grand total amount of the Burgess and Burgess combined agreements is not to exceed $50,000. This contract will be funded through RTA's operating budget.
Is there a second to the motion?
I'll second.
Okay, motion made by Sharon and seconded by Ed. Any questions or comments? Hearing none, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, like sign. Any abstentions? Motion is unanimously approved. Sure. we'll address that later. Okay,
He's doing well.
okay, good.
That concludes my action items. However, for the report, at the meeting, Ms. Mary Stanford reported that receipts for the month of December 2013 totaled $3.61 million, which represents an increase of 1.6% compared to December 2012. Year-to-date receipts after 12 months are up 3.2% or $1.1 million as compared to last year. Sales tax trends were very favorable for 2013. February 2014 financial statements. At the meeting, Ms. Stanford also reported that February 2014 net income after local depreciation was $639,000 compared to a budget of $234,000. The positive variance of $405,000 was due to higher federal assistance and higher investment revenue, along with lower operating expenses related to contract services and liability insurance. February 2014 year-to-date net income after local depreciation was $246,000 compared to a year-to-date budgeted loss of $319,000. The positive $565,000 variance was due to higher federal assistance and higher investment revenue, along with lower operating expenses related to contract services and liability insurance. Lower operating revenue partially offset these favorable variances. Also of important note, RTA's 2013 financial statement audit is currently being finalized by Charles E. Harris and Associates. The 2013 audit report will be discussed at length at the April 15, 2014 Joint Hill Committee meeting. Federal funding update. At the meeting, Mr. Bob Brzezinski made an informative presentation regarding the Federal Transit Administration's funding history as it relates to Dayton, Ohio. For the federal fiscal year 2014, RTA will receive over $30 million from various federal programs. These federal funds support both the operating and capital budgets. Mr. Brzezinski detailed the Section 5307 Urban Area Formula, Section 5339 Bus and Bus Facilities Formula, and Section 5337 State of Good Repair Grants. Of the $30 million related to federal fiscal year 2014, $10.5 million is specifically attributed to the fixed guideway, more commonly referred to as trolley bus system. The $10.5 million of trolley bus funding is critical in supporting all bus modes in Dayton. This concludes my report, Mr. President.
Thank you. Are there any questions of Sharon? I think it's important that we remind everyone that the numbers for February as well as for the 2 months ended February 28th still have to be adjusted for the sales tax numbers. We have a 3-month lag. We don't know what those sales tax numbers are. We get to know what January's collections were in April, and we get to know what February's collections were in May. And the numbers that appear in these financial statements is that which we budgeted. So any additions or deletions from that amount will be reflected in future financial statements. So they're as close as we can get at this time without knowing actually what the sales tax numbers are. And as you all know, that's a very, very important number. We rely very heavily on sales tax to meet the budget here at the RTA. Okay. Moving on, Mark, we then go to the Executive Director's report.
Thank you again, Franz. I've been speaking too much today, so I'm going to try to just keep it to a couple informational items. We have a couple new members of the RTA team here, so I just want to introduce them. The first is Tracy Hanlon-Rohr. Tracy, if you would stand up, please, just so they know who you are. Tracy is our new business development specialist, so she'll be working with our Smart Choice program and other things like where we try to sell our fair media in bulk to the big employers in the region, all our outreach programs, things like that. So she's joined our marketing team. And also Shannon Ryan. Shannon's here. Shannon's our new transportation manager. We're going to do a gray hair check right now. And I see none. So we'll check back on you, and he'll be working with Brandon and Allison, obviously, in the operations department. So it's great to have them on board. You know, I sent out an email a few days ago. I once again want to thank a whole lot of folks throughout the organization. We promised Federal Highway and ODOT that we would get the Pentagon Boulevard amenities in place before the 1st of April, and we did it. So we being everybody, starting with Bob and Pete Trick and Bob's department, everybody, we had some help in planning, of course, the maintenance folks. So we got them in, they look fantastic, and we're very happy with that, so I'm very pleased about that. One last item I wanted to let you know about. You heard anything about bike share lately? I hope you have, because we've been trying to do a media blast, and this is a great, great thing. We've got more and more information to come out about it soon, but we were so excited to have found the capital funding for this project that the project partners, including ourselves, the City of Dayton, Bike Miami Valley, the Miami Valley Regional Planning Commission, Metro Parks, Montgomery County Public Health. It's a big group. Even the Dayton Chamber got involved in this. And we've been talking about this with the partner group for about a year. You know, all the cities we want to compete with in this country are doing programs like bike share. They're doing a lot of other things too, which we're trying to emulate as well with our river project that's coming online the next couple of years, all about the idea of placemaking and developing a community where it's a lot easier to sell when you have a new business that wants to locate. What happened here was somewhat unique. You know, you had given me the green light to help pursue this, and on the idea being that we would be a partner on an in-kind basis, and we would hopefully be the conduit for the project and then work as an in-kind partner, and that's the way it's going to happen. We will be the owner and the physical operator and maintainer of the bike system with our folks internally. That will be done primarily by our maintenance department, some by our operations department. And then the idea here is, I've been saying this for a few days now, and what I say is classic Dayton style. We looked at how the other 24 cities in the country that have done this have set it up. Almost in every case, they've hired a private for-profit entity to manage this operation. Our goal was, what could our project partners bring to the table to provide as good or better a program and do it for less money, which translates into lower, membership costs for the community. And my friend Scott Murphy would say, to remind everybody, that this is transportation first, recreation second. It's the whole idea of making first and last mile connections for people, people who ride our buses today or who don't ride our buses on certain days because they can't do midday errands can now do them with a bike share program. And there'll be more and more to come, but I wanted to just kind of tee it up. Kudos to Brian Martin, our new executive director at the Planning Commission. He called the project partners and said, this really all came about as the result of a highway project in the northern part of our region that came in way under budget when they went to bid with it. And it was a classic case of the federal funds. These are road funds, were old funds, and if they could not get them encumbered by June of this year in a project, the funds would go back to the ODOT Columbus office and probably be spent on the Ohio Turnpike or something far away from Dayton, Ohio. And Brian knew instinctively that we could make this project happen and we could get the work done to encumber the funds by June. So that was the key. Brian teed it up. We took it through the committees at MVRPC and then eventually the MVRPC board, on which I sit, where it passed unanimously to literally transfer these ODOT highway funds through the Federal Transit Administration to us to do the procurement. The other key to this was the City of Dayton. Our Mayor, Nan Whaley, stood up and in the 11th hour of their budgeting process helped set aside $250,000. All of the cash local match for this project is being funded by the City of Dayton. So, and everybody's going to have another part in this. We're probably going to be the primary in-kind provider. The theory is we will be the owner, the maintainer, the operator, and Bike Miami Valley, which is a not-for-profit, which will change its structure in the next month actually, will become the administrative end. They will sell the memberships, they'll do the promotion, sell sponsorships. We will do the nuts and bolts side of the business, and we think we're going to have a fantastic program. It will start with 22 stations in the core area of what I call the greater downtown, so it gets to the Dayton Art Institute, the Grafton Hill area, my neighborhood right Dunbar, as far south as UD, and then east to St. Anne's Hill. That's the starter segment, and about 200 bikes to go with that. We think it'll grow after that. The cities that have done it have had really good success. You might have noticed I'm excited about this. You know, I see this as one more unique asset we put in place in the city of Dayton. We'll only be the second city in Ohio to implement. Columbus is just slightly ahead of us. Cincinnati wants one, but they don't have it funded. So our goal is this time a year from now, we're going to be unveiling the bikes and the bike stations for the public, and it's going to be a great, great project. So look forward to more on that, both internally and publicly. But this is a great project and a great project that we are to be involved with as a primary partner. So I'm pretty excited about it.
Mark, besides being enthusiastic about it, given the history of the bicycle in this community, you know, from two brothers who had a bicycle repair shop, as well as the headquarters of the Huffy Corporation, manufacturing of the Huffy bikes, and given our recognition for the amount of bike paths we had, there's a lot of thinking of going into using bicycles. So,
You know, it's
being part of it, thank you.
obviously, well, I would say our geography starts it. You know, this is a natural community. We've already gotten well into the bike share movement. You know, we're a bronze certified bike-friendly city. I know the mayor's goal is to get us to platinum. This is another big step towards doing that, and you see the improvements we've made downtown. But you're absolutely right. It's kind of neat that, you know, you have that serious bicycle history here from the Wright brothers and the Huffy Corporation. And I know Fred Smith would be proud. He really would if he was here today to see this kind of next step in the evolution. And when you start to think about combining these new wonderful assets that we're putting, you know, in the core area, and my friends the millennials, we couldn't get through a meeting without me using the millennial word, Brandon. So, you know, we're stuck with them, and we know they're a different group of people, and I'm telling you, you know, we have to. The research is pretty clear on the sorts of amenities, you know, the next generation wants, and smart communities are moving that direction, and I think we've got a good project team, and I would say good leadership in the community to know that this is an asset we need, you know, because it could be the one thing that takes a company over the edge to say, you know, we're comparing cities, well, we're going to go to Dayton because they have the parks and they have the river and they have the bikes. They have all these programs that are good for our families and quality of life. So I'm going to be quiet now, Franz, because
Thank you, Mark.
I'm going on.
Moving on, is there any old business to come before the board? Any new business to come before the board? Hearing none, we now go to the public comment, and I believe we have one person who signed up for that, Ms. Pritzinger, as I say correctly. And again, I know you've been here in the past, but I think it's important just to repeat the ground rules. You have 3 minutes to speak before us. That timing will start after you give your name and address. At the end of 2.5 minutes, you will have a yellow light that tells you you have half a minute left to go, and at 3 o'clock, we will have to end the comment. So let me turn it over to you.
Alrighty. Well, hello, everyone. CAP members were supposed to be here today, so I apologize I didn't dress up or anything, but as backup, I know Gary Hott here, my neighbor, and I'll tell you, so I wanted to say congratulations. He could write a book, I think. I want to encourage you down on that. And there's so many little things to know riding a bus that would really be helpful, not to just bus drivers, but, you know, to riders. So thank you, congratulations. I didn't know that many years, wow. You should get a Purple Heart, too. I've been riding a bus off and on for a few years. Usually my car breaks down or something. Anyway, and my husband was paraplegic. He worked for the city of Dayton years ago, and he said, "Carla, you got 2 legs." But anyway, I'm gonna read this letter I wrote. Mr. Heckler called me back and said he wrote letters to Moraine, West Carrollton, and Miami Township about the busy intersection concerning the walkway and intersection crossing. They're working on getting permission with Public Works to build a shelter, also at number 9, bus number 9 at McIntosh Park. I received a call from a lady from West Carrollton City today. She said she will email me what ODOT had planned for the intersection. Their shelter is on private property there, so they cannot clear the shelter when it snows. So I still want to work on getting, either permission or a contract for these shelters. On that note, the shelter, I think in front of Kroger's there on Springborough's, it's pretty close to traffic, but it gets slushy snow on the bench and everything really close. So, I just want to mention that. And I've seen, talking about bikes, I've seen people in their 70s riding bikes here at the main hub.
Good.
So, and I went to Seattle for a few years ago, and they have free buses. But yeah, I would like to talk to you guys about. I didn't know if there was still free bus rides in downtown Dayton. I think you used to have
No,
that
Mayor
stop and
McClendon
go.
still reminds me that I took away her dash. But,
That was it.
But
Oh, that was great.
those have been gone for about 5 years.
That's great, because if you're getting from one side to the other, or, you have to walk several blocks. Boy, I think I'm almost finished here. And, well, a coincidence is the trolley that broke down at the main hub a week ago after the last board meeting, where the first lady was speaking, mentioned the trolleys were always breaking down. I thought that was a coincidence, but I was wondering how many times do the trolleys break down since she said that, and how many more than average. So I hope that doesn't happen as much.
Time's up now.
Oh, all right.
Well, Carla, I'll give you the answer on that. It's too often they break down. And it's about, I'm over here. So the, yeah, it's me. You know me. About every 1,000 miles, they encounter a mechanical failure compared to closer to 3,000 on a diesel bus. But as you know, I hope you're aware, this year we will take delivery of the prototypes for the future of the trolley bus operation, and we're very excited that the vehicles we're going to bring to town to put on the wire and to the test are going to address the issues we've been concerned about, so we can get back to restoring our confidence in that system from more than just an economics perspective. Propulsion-wise, it's very cheap to operate, but we've had these mechanical issues, and we think the new bus is going to address those. So we're very hopeful.
Yeah, Gary mentioned that. You're getting 4 buses, and I love trolleys for some reason.
Right.
Maybe it's Mr. Rogers' neighborhood thing or something, but
Well, Gary
it's
does
on
too.
that.
He drives them a lot.
Carla, thank you. One thing you and I both forgot, Carla, is you should have started by giving your name and address. If you could just, for the record, do that for the
My
meeting.
name's Carla Pitzinger. You need my address?
Yes.
It's 3329 Shady View Road, one word, Moraine, Ohio. It's right behind the street maintenance building there.
Thank you so much. Thank you. We now get on to board member comments. I would like to start by expressing our deepest sympathies on behalf of the board to Ed Depp, who lost his father this past week, and to Sharon Hairston, who lost her mother-in-law yesterday, I believe, or the day before. Yeah, so our deepest sympathy to both of you. Are there any other comments that the board members would like to make, or announcements?
Well, I would like to make one quick announcement. Go Flyers. I was so excited for Dayton for us just getting up to the, what was it, 6 or?
Elite Eight.
Elite Eight. And then also being able to see the RTA bus with the advertisement, Go Flyers. So that was just really, really, what'd you say, huh? Oh, okay, no doubt, on Facebook as well. But that was just great to see the, everybody's coming together as a city for us, the city of Dayton, and just, they really got pretty close there. Yeah.
Thank you. And Sharon, did you have anything?
I was just going to say something similar to my fellow board member and just say, as a member of the local organizing committee for the NCAA First Four, we will have that tournament again next year, which will be the last year of our current contract. And I just want to thank the RTA for its support and advertising everything that people who live outside of our region see of us, and making sure that we look good helps us as we go into the bidding process, which will begin this summer. And so I think the city and the region really embraced everything we were doing this year, and that goes a long way with the NCAA.
Thank you.
Am
Janet?
I correct? I'm reading in the media that the lights around the
Building lights,
building?
yeah.
The building lights are blue and red, the airport tower, the
Right.
bridge, the region, and all of that is shown on TV, so that's why it's really important. So every time that bus goes by, says Go Flyers, you never know when there's a camera watching, so it was great.
I just might as well add, I missed all of that here, but I got to see the game on Thursday night. And I will tell you that most of Memphis that we saw were rooting for the Flyers. All of the people who worked in the DoubleTree Inn, they all had Flyer shirts on. It was really pretty cool. So anyway, go Flyers.
Good. I don't think there's a need for an executive session. Hearing none, I'll entertain a motion that we adjourn this meeting. Move.
Second.
Second, okay. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Meeting adjourned.